Boldwood presents The Mersey Mothers, written by Sheila Riley and read by Julie Maisie. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue, January 1947. He sat rigid, fixed on her every move. Each spin revealing a gaudy red suspender holding up black nylon stockings, no doubt supplied by Uncle Sam's finest. He knew the instant she clocked him. Her self-assured expression faltered. She hadn't expected to see him. Her uncertain gaze tracked the journey of the man who went into the gents' lavatory. Raising his chin, he ignored Bert, the part-time pianist, hammering out a foot-stomping tune. And she twirled when taproom singing cut through the fog of tobacco smoke and bounced off the red papered walls. Revellers clapping in time to the music. Throwing back her head, confidence restored, laughing. She thought they were over. She ought to know better. The music stopped. Her ruby lips frozen in a practiced smile, whooping when a tavern drinker hooked her thickening waist, pulling her to him, nuzzling private words in her ear. Pulling herself free, she ignored an invitation. Nodding to the empty seat, she shook her head. Hesitant, her eyes sneaking a look to the closed door of the gents. And a fire-breathing dragon reared up inside him. So, the rumour he had heard was true. Tightly squeezing the glass in his hand, it shattered, spraying glittering shards across the table. She gave him her full attention now. Narrowing the distance between them, she crossed the crowded bar, so close he could see the loathing in her eyes. Damn you to hell. You've no right following me. She stabbed him with her words and grabbed her handbag, coat and scarf. Her lips dripped venom as she gripped the gleaming brass handle of the tram tavern door. In seconds he was behind her, forcing her outside. Making a show of me like that, she hissed, shaking his blood-stained hand off her arm. You had everybody looking when you broke that glass. Bloody lunatic. She wrapped the hand-knitted scarf round her head and neck, pulling up the wide collar of her coat. Hurrying now, her heels scraped the cracked pavement as a westerly gale whipped off the River Mersey, pushing her along the dock road. She would take the long way home, try to shake him off, knowing what he was after, and not wanting a scene in front of her kids, Jack and Lucy. A torrent of hailstones turned the ground icy white. He pushed her into the doorway of Blackledge's bakery. Angry, she took out an untipped cigarette and lit it. And, tilting back her head, she blew a straight line of smoke over his shoulder towards the overhead railway, high above the immense granite walls following the docks along the constant surge of river, and flicked ash with measured nonchalance. There's a real party atmosphere in the tavern tonight. Cheerful, you know? Like the good times, when I worked on the White Star Line's finest, before Cunard took over. She blinked rapidly, ignoring his intimidating glare. Then there was the war, of course. The first, not the second. By the second war, I was well and truly anchored. Why don't you leave me alone? Aggravated, she wondered why she provoked jealous men. She flicked the cigarette into the gutter, her blunt self-confidence giving her an insolent air. Piss off! I told you we're over. I'm taking my kids back to Ireland. We're over when I say so, he growled, and you won't be going to Ireland. You want to bet? She made to move out of the doorway, and he put the flat of his hands against the cold tiles above her shoulder. I'm going, and you can't stop me. Ducking out of his way, her heel caught in the space once filled by a terracotta tile, and she stumbled, saved only by his immense bulk. That last rum's gone straight to my head. As did the thundering slap that caught her side on, her head hitting the tiles with a crack. No time to cry out or retaliate. She gasped a lungful of freezing air that floated round her like a hoar-frost shroud. She put up her hand, failing to fend off a blow that made her eyeballs dance. Tears of shock rolled unchecked down her cheeks. And for the first time in a long while she prayed, "Holy Mary, Mother of God." His grip tightened around her throat, the throbbing pressure cutting off her words. She gagged, her mind screaming, "Stop!" The bomb-damaged street spun, and her tongue lolled from swollen lips. As darkness closed round her, he stopped squeezing. Aware of being dragged, she felt her ankle strap break, and he held her shoe over the wall of a derelict house before pulling her down the narrow back alley, a dark and lonely shortcut that no respectable woman would journey on a night like this. Betrayal was not an option. Nobody was allowed to leave him. Drawing his forefinger and thumb along the full length of his razor-thin moustache, his rasping breath came in short bursts, and he spat out the mucus that had gathered in his mouth. Standing on the bank of the canal, the bulging veins in his temple pulsated. She had betrayed him. He wasn't going to stand for that. She had some gall. Moving back to Ireland, she said. That was her first mistake. Leaving him was her second. She was never going back. The fire-breathing dragon was appeased, and his ice-coloured eyes stared at the water until it stilled. Only then did he turn and walk away. Chapter 1. Winter, January 1953. 25-year-old Evie Kilgaren put away the last of the Saturday reports, closed the filing cabinet drawer and sighed. Looking out of the office window across the cobbled yard, she felt as gloomy as the darkening sky, knowing the accounts she had just finished were nowhere near good enough to keep Skinner and Son going for much longer. Focusing on the shapeless black clouds scudding across an ashen sky, she tried to keep such thoughts at bay. But Evie knew that ignoring them would not make her and Danny's troubles go away. Something had to be done. But what? Turning from the window, Evie put the cover over her typewriter, tidied her desk and made sure all was neat for Monday. Hoping that next week would be better, the scant work she had done this morning didn't merit coming into the office on a Saturday. But her brother Jack was in Korea doing his national service. He had been there for the last 2 years. Lucy, her sister, was working in Madam B's, training to be a hairdresser. And Danny, her fiancé, had gone on a long-distance delivery, so there wasn't much point in staying at home on her own. Locking the office door and securing the huge double gates of the yard, she shivered when the bone-chilling gale whipped up from the choppy River Mersey and snatched at the woolen scarf covering her head. She had to bend forward to catch her breath as the eddying wind clawed at her clothes and whipped swirling papers and empty cigarette packets across the debris and along Reckoner's Row towards the house she had lived in all of her life, except for that time when her mother's lodger threw her out onto the street, and she had to be rescued by Sergeant Danny Harris, the man she was now engaged to marry. When he left the army, Danny had bought the haulage firm from his stepfather, Henry Skinner, for the grand price of £1. And since then, Evie and Danny had been working hard to make the haulage business pay, but it was far from easy. Evie worried about Danny going on the delivery to a firm on the far side of Manchester. He didn't usually go so far from Liverpool, but he was in no position to turn down work of any kind, no matter what day or distance. Since Leonard Haulage opened along Regent Road, known the world over as the Dock Road, a few months ago, business in Skinner's haulage yard had suffered an almost fatal blow. It didn't help matters that Danny had been sent on a number of hoax calls either. The order to go and pick up deliveries from warehouses along the Dock Road, were met with blank-faced foremen scratching their heads, not knowing by whom or even why he had been hired, although the dockets looked real enough. Evie wished she could do something to help build up the business. Danny was doing everything he could to keep his head above water, but with work slowing to a crawl, there was barely enough to go round, and there was a danger that he may have to lay men off who had worked in the yard longer than he had. "I could put an advert in the paper," she'd told Danny last night. "Using my post office box number should bring in new accounts for me to pay bills." But she hadn't been prepared for the pained look in his eyes, and she knew, when she saw the muscle in his jaw twitch, that he was doing his best to keep a cool head. "I know you want to do all you can, love, but this is my worry, not yours." It was the way he had said love which tore at her heart. The word sounded so distant, like something you would say to a stranger. "Thanks, love, do call again." And Evie feared he might be having second thoughts about their summer wedding. Maybe even having second thoughts about marrying her, full stop. He had always said he wanted to build an empire before he settled down, and Evie had told him she would help him. But how could you build an empire on nothing but hopes and dreams and keep a family going? It was impossible, and wasn't helped by the fact that Leonard Haulage had a dozen wagons and drivers, many more than Skinner's did. So why did Leonard want this yard too? They had recently made an offer which Danny had refused. Evie had her suspicions, of course. Skinner and Son was situated in Somersettle, prime Dockland, close to the warehouses and waterfront. It would be the cherry on Leonard's cake. How could they possibly compete with Leonard's setup with his motorised wagons? Skinner and Son mostly had horses which were far slower. They had only one motorised wagon and needed more in order to compete. But to be able to buy wagons, they had to have money. An insurmountable situation, which Evie could see no way out of, and had foregone a proper wage to help sustain the business. She'd even taken on confidential accounts to supplement her income, like she had done in the far-off days when she was studying to become a certified accountant. Taking on work for a number of businessmen through a post office box address to keep business private on both sides, men who didn't want their income made available for one reason or another. So, desperate means called for desperate measures. And with Leonard Haulage taking over a large slice of the road transport cake, she was in no position to be fussy, especially when, each day, she saw Danny's happy-go-lucky spark diminish a little bit more. This yard was his life. His stepfather, Henry Skinner, had kept it going through the Depression in the 1930s, then during the war. He'd risked being blown off the dock road in his effort to deliver produce to wherever it was needed. Danny, a proud man, a good man, who would help anybody in difficulty, could not keep secrets from her. And she wasn't about to let his business go under if she could possibly do something to help it flourish. She had a duty as his fiancée and his bookkeeper to ease his burden, even suggesting they wait a little longer to marry. Although the thought of it broke her heart. She was ever so thankful when Danny refused to entertain the idea. He told her he would marry her tomorrow if he could, but he knew that preparations were being made for the coming coronation of the new Queen at the beginning of June, so they decided to marry at the end of June. Her day was going to be the one she deserved, he said, even if he had to work all the hours God sent to earn the money to pay for it. Which was all well and good, she thought, but what if there was no work to be had? Evie, pragmatic through necessity, was not one for making extravagant gestures and would be happy with a quiet wedding. Just a few close friends like Connie and Angus, who ran the Tram Tavern, and their two little ones, and of course Mim, Connie's mother. Then there was the family, Meggie and Henry, Danny's birth mother and stepfather, and Evie's brother Jack and sister Lucy. And what about Ada Harris? And Grace and Bobby? The family Danny had thought of as his own before Bert Harris blew the whole thing spectacularly out in the open 3 years ago. But Danny would not hear of a quiet wedding day. He was determined to make sure she got her big splash. The only question in Evie's mind was how he was going to afford it and keep his men in work. The answer was beyond her. Nothing much had changed round here. The same people lived in the same houses, rarely moving out of the area they knew so well. Some of the young men had gone off to do their national service, like her 20-year-old brother Jack, who had been in Korea for the last 2 years. National service had been lengthened from 18 months because of the Korean War, when troops from North Korea invaded South Korea, and the United Nations Security Council had sent armed forces from America and Great Britain to aid South Korea. The wind howled like a banshee as Evie hurried head down along Reckoner's Row, eager to get her front door open. Once inside, she put her backside to the door to close it in the damp, swollen wood, keen to get a good fire going for when Lucy came home from work. In the back kitchen, Evie emptied her wicker shopping basket of a paper parcel containing scrag ends of mutton and some cheap chuck beef, which, although it would need a long time cooking in the oven, would make a very tasty casserole mixed with the pot herbs and potatoes she'd managed to buy that morning. And she was looking forward to getting a hearty meal on the go, making a thick crust to go on top. On a day like this, her sister would enjoy a hot meal to come home to, and Danny, if he managed to get back from the delivery job out in Netherford, would too when he made his usual after-work visit. Evie shivered. Those rough, narrow country lanes did not bear thinking about in this weather, and she hoped Danny's clapped-out truck that had seen better days years ago was up to coping with this deluge. "That's a dark, sinister sky if ever I saw one," Lucy said to her best friend, fellow apprentice Rachel McAndrew, who was hanging damp towels over anything that would allow them to dry while turning on the hairdryers in the dressing-out cubicles to dry them for the afternoon clients. "Dark and sinister?" Rachel scoffed light-heartedly. "Have you swallowed a Gothic novel?" Rachel laughed, and Lucy pulled back the pink-frilled net curtain draped decadently across the wide window of Madame Barbary's Coiffure, a posh-sounding name for the ladies' hairdressing salon on busy Stanley Road, leading into town, as everybody called the centre of Liverpool. "We're usually mad busy at this time on a Saturday," said Lucy, who would rather be tending to a client's hair than mopping floors, which is what the senior stylist, Madame Barbary, would instruct her to do if business was slack. "This horrible weather is obviously putting people off having their hair done today." "Would you pay to have your hair done on a day like this? Because I know I wouldn't," Rachel said, and Lucy gave her friend a playful shove. She and Rachel had both started working at the same time for Madame Barbary, or Mrs. Buffon, as Rachel called their employer, who would not be out of place on the parade ground of the local army barracks. They quickly became friends, even though they were as different as black and white in personality. Lucy and Rachel were the same slender size and shape, but there the similarity ended. Lucy daydreamed about owning her own salon one day, while harum-scarum Rachel wanted nothing more than to find a nice boy to marry and get out of her mother's overflowing house of 6 children and befuddled grandma, who didn't know what day it was half the time. Rachel and her family were a bit scatty and sometimes raucous, but Lucy loved the hustle and bustle of their house, next door, knowing her own was a bit quiet and sedate, with just her and Evie rattling around, especially now that their Jack had been posted to Korea. The McAndrews had only moved in last year, and Lucy thought they were a breath of fresh air in the small row of houses opposite the canal. "Do you think a lemon rinse would brighten this up?" Rachel asked, flicking her high ponytail. "I think it would," Lucy answered, "but I can see 2 problems there, 3 if you count your dad." Lucy ignored Rachel's raised eyebrow, knowing her friend would not have a bad word said about her boisterous family. "First, it's nowhere near summer, so we've got no sun to help the lemon juice along. And second, you can't buy a lemon for love nor money." "That's true." Rachel's shoulders slumped, and she twisted her fringe into a small curly sausage. "Why don't you just comb some peroxide through it?" Lucy asked. "I combed peroxide through my fringe when I first started here, and when Dad asked what happened, I told him the sun had lightened it." Rachel pulled her face in the mirror, safe in the knowledge her employer was in the staff room having her lunch, while she and Lucy continued to hang up the towels. "The next morning, Dad gave me £0.50 and told me to ask Mrs. Buffon to take the sun out of my hair." Both girls laughed at the thought. £0.50, said Lucy. "I'd have done it for free." "I spent the £0.50 and rubbed black boot polish on the front." Rachel could hardly get the words out for laughing. "I'll look like old Jolson by the end of the day." By the time they'd stopped laughing, all thoughts of the driving rain and howling wind had disappeared. "It's not that my dad's old-fashioned," Rachel said as the laughter ebbed away. "It's just that he doesn't like me messing with my hair." "Highly unlikely when you're in this profession," Lucy teased, noticing her pal's ash-blonde hair had grown dull over the winter. "I wish I was born with your titian-coloured hair," Rachel said. "Redheads are impulsive, irrational, quick-tempered, passionate and revolutionary." "That sounds more like you than me," replied Lucy, pulling a face in the mirror at her mane of glossy auburn curls. "Maybe you should have been a redhead." "Yes," Rachel sighed, talking through the mirror. "I could just see myself with a golden mane of tumbling tresses." "Now who's swallowed a book?" Lucy laughed. "Our Evie doesn't mind what I do to my hair, although she's not as particular as me about her looks." "Oh, go on now. Don't let her hear you say that." They both laughed again, but not for long, when they heard the click of Madam's heels on the linoleum-covered floor next door. "You sound like my parents," Rachel moaned. "You don't know how lucky you are not having a mum and dad laying down the law." Her tactless words sounded harsher coming from her lips than they did in her head, and Rachel's face suddenly suffused with a deep red tinge. "Oh, Lucy, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that the way it came out." "I know you didn't," said Lucy, who knew her friend's thoughts usually came into her head and went straight out of her mouth, like a helter-skelter ride. "Our Evie's like a mam, since her own mam." Lucy didn't want to think about how her mother had been found dead in the local canal 6 years ago, and her da, her good shepherd, had been wrongly locked away in a hospital, accused of her demise. The laughter died, as always, when she thought of her father. For as much as she was sure she would have loved her mam had she known her better, the truth of the matter was, Lucy hardly knew her at all, having been evacuated to Ireland as a baby with her brother Jack at the beginning of the war in 1939. She didn't see anything of her mam, Rene, for years. Not until 2 years after the war ended. Rene had evicted the lodger, Leo Darnell, at Christmas, so she could bring her and Jack back to Liverpool, and then a few weeks later, her mother went out one night, and she never came home. But she had seen the man she now knew was her da every day back in Ireland. He tended sheep on the neighbouring farm, hence that was why she called him her good shepherd, who told her stories of a handsome prince who married a beautiful princess and lived happily ever after, until the ogre declared war and separated the prince from the princess and their little ones. Then the little prince and princess were sent to the land of milk and honey to be cared for by kindly relatives, and the mighty prince, knew he must survive to save them all and be reunited with his beautiful princess. Lucy would listen to his stories every day and imagine what it must be like to live in a castle by the river. The thought brought a lump to her throat, and Lucy hurried to the stock cupboard to find methylated spirits to clean dried hair lacquer off the mirrors. It was early afternoon, and the sky darkened, growing murkier by the minute. With a flash of lightning, the heavens opened, and Lucy had never seen rain so heavy or intense. You could hardly see the road outside for the rainstorm. Even for the end of January, the storm was a force to be reckoned with, and the howling gale was making it almost impossible to walk for the few brave souls who had ventured out and got caught up in it all. Watching from the window, Lucy saw stooped pedestrians battling against the elements, and she shivered. The busy road, which was normally packed with people, looked desolate for a Saturday afternoon. Obviously busy housewives, who were usually out buying their rations, had more sense than to brave this weather and were staying near their coal fire today. "Come away from that window and collect the towels ready for the bagwash," said Madame Barbary as she came into the salon from the staff room next door. "I doubt we will be busy this afternoon." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Why didn't she say that before we put them all out to dry?" she hissed through perfect straight white teeth. "And where's that flaming Saturday girl? This is her job, not ours." "She went home for her dinner and didn't come back," answered Lucy. "I can't say I blame her. Neither would I, given the chance." Rachel went into the back room for the laundry basket, and Lucy wondered if they would have to stay here all afternoon on the off chance they might get a client. "Are you going to enter the apprentice finals this year?" asked Lucy, when Rachel came back into the salon. "You've got the flair." "I don't know." Rachel looked despondent. "You are much better at that kind of thing than me. I'd rather be the model than the stylist." "Right then," said Lucy with determination, as if her mind had finally been made up. "In that case, I'll ask Mrs. Buffon if she will put my name forward, and you can be my model." "That's the ticket." Suddenly Rachel cheered up and was much chirpier, but only for a moment. "I suppose we'll have to lug all the towels to the baggie," she said, dragging the towels off the egg-shaped hairdryer hoods and pushing them into the laundry basket. "It's not so bad," Lucy said. "I would rather put towels into a washing machine than brush and mop the floor." All she had ever wanted to do was to become a ladies' hairdresser and one day run her own salon. But her salon would not be run like an army barracks, like Mrs. Buffon's. "When I get my own salon, I'll get the laundry collected and the towels will be brought back all clean and neatly folded." She could see it now. Her salon would be all shiny, with glossy worktops, an open plan like one of those posh ones in town. "I'll employ a cleaner as well to brush and mop the floors and fill up the shampoo and conditioner containers." "I suppose you'll have a waitress to bring Earl Grey tea and delicate porcelain cups too?" "Certainly not. I'll have champagne fountains, like Mr. Teasy Weasy." Lucy closed her eyes and dreamed out loud. "Raymond, that's Mr. Teasy Weasy to you, has gilt mirrors and crystal chandeliers." Mr. Teasy Weasy, a famous hairdresser with a salon in Mayfair, styled the hair of the biggest celebrities. "I read that article too, in one of those dog-eared magazines," Rachel, not to be outdone, added. "His French accent isn't real, you know." "Really?" Lucy giggled. "Why does he speak like that then?" "To bring in more clients. Sorry, female clientele, but don't let Madam know. She thinks he's the best thing since perm lotion. I'd have to learn the language first, but I would love to learn all about his colouring techniques," said Rachel, who'd left school with sufficient qualifications to secure her indentures with Madam. Lucy couldn't help but laugh at her best friend's pragmatic outlook. But what Rachel lacked in ambition, she made up for in creative flair, She could match colours with the best of them given the chance. "One thing I am determined to do is own a salon as good as any of the posh ones in town," said Lucy. Hairdressing was her vocation, and she gained experience from practising her craft every chance she got, gleaning ideas from magazines and movie stars. Madam had even given her 2 regular clients to perfect her creative skills. But Madam was most put out when one of her own clients asked for Lucy the following week. Rachel was still at the stage where she was putting in rollers and handing end papers and perm curlers to Madam, which would bore Lucy to tears, and she found Madam's style a little staid. She could probably set all her clients' hair in her sleep, whereas Lucy was itching to get her hands on some of the ladies whose bouffant and French pleats were set in liquid cement and did not move from the moment the hair was dressed until the following week, when it was brushed out to be shampooed, with dry hair lacquer falling to the floor like snow. "Do you think St. Patrick's Church dance will still be on tonight?" Rachel asked, snapping Lucy out of her reverie. They both lived for the weekend dance at the local church hall, where they would almost dance the legs off themselves to the local band playing the latest songs. Lucy and Rachel had been practising swing dancing in Lucy's front parlour, perfecting the Lindy Hop, which they were eager to try out tonight. "I doubt it, unless this weather calms down a bit," said Lucy, who knew an umbrella would not stay up in this wind. "Otherwise we'll get to the dance looking as if we've struggled through a hedge backwards, and I dread to think about the hair situation." "Do you think she'll let us go early?" Rachel asked, looking over to her boss, who was flicking through a ladies' magazine, which had been on the table since the year dot. Lucy shrugged. "She'll probably have us up a ladder cleaning the light bulbs," said Lucy. Then suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the salon into a dark gloom, and the 2 girls looked at each other. Then they looked to the ceiling. "Did you forget to pay the bill, madam?" Rachel asked with a mischievous grin, as Lucy collected the rest of the damp towels, wondering how her best friend got away with her cheeky banter. "Of course I paid the bill, you impudent girl," Madam answered. The laundry basket was now full and ready to haul down the road, past the butcher's shop, where the young butcher would stand at the window and wolf whistle every time she walked past. And even though she loved the compliment, she would toss her head and appear to ignore him. Looking out of the window now, she couldn't see much as the heavy deluge was lashing hard. "I don't fancy taking this lot to the baggy," said Lucy. "We're going to get soaked." "I bet she hasn't paid the bill," Rachel whispered insistently, and Lucy nudged her with her elbow. "Shush, she heard you," Lucy said, trying not to laugh. But their mirth was short-lived. "Don't stand around like Pithy on a rock bun," said Madam. "Go and see if you can find the reason why the electricity is out. See if anybody else has been cut off." Lucy grabbed her coat and put it over her head, and Rachel did the same. But only moments after their feet touched the pavement, they were soaked right through. Even the awnings outside the adjoining shops were sagging with the weight of water. All shopkeepers along the usually busy road were outside their businesses. "I've just been talking to the local bobby here," said the butcher importantly, looking towards the policeman standing nearby. "He told me all the lights are out this side of the canal. We're on a circuit, see," he said, as if this was something everybody should know. "The electric cables have snapped due to this bloody wind and rain, and all the lights have been cut off for the foreseeable." "He doesn't look very pleased," said Lucy, and Rachel nodded. "Who's going to pay for my stock? That's what I want to know." The butcher pushed his rain-soaked flat cap to the back of his balding head. "If the lecky's off and my fridge defrosts, all my meat will go off with it." "You could always sell it off cheap, save losing it," said Lucy, in that cheeky but seemingly innocent way she had about her, and noticed the glint in the young trainee butcher's eye. "You mind your own," said the older butcher, who was one of the most expensive on the block. I'm not going to throw away my profits for the sake of a bit of rain." "Even the telephones have been knocked out," said the beat bobby in his domed helmet and warm cape. "It's worse than the war." "Hardly," said Lucy, dripping from head to foot. A short while later, they returned to the salon with the news the power would be off until further notice. "Well then, there's no use standing around here like one of Lewis's," said Madame Barbary, surprising and thrilling both girls with the news they were going home early. "So just take all those towels out of the laundry basket and drape them around the salon, on the chairs, the dryers, any way you can. We must have dry towels for Monday, if by then the electricity is back on." Lucy and Rachel wasted no time flinging towels over every surface and brushing the floor of hair. "Such a shame we didn't get the chance to practice our finger waves and pin curls," Rachel told Madam, who raised a cynical eyebrow. "Get going before I change my mind," said their employer, and both girls did not need telling twice. They were in their wet coats in the blink of an eye. "Should we go and see if Willie's is still open?" Lucy asked. Excited they had finished early, running head down to the large Woolworths shop along the rain-lashed road. Chapter 2. "Thank God you made it home in one piece," Evie said to her soaked 16-year-old sister, who catapulted through the back door on a driving gale and dripped all over the linoleum floor. "You look like you've been hit by a tornado." "So would you if you went out in that lot. I was blown all the way home," Lucy gasped. "I believe half the country has no electricity," said Evie, hanging up Lucy's coat on the cellar door. She had brought Lucy up since their mother was killed, and their father, Lucy's good shepherd, had been incarcerated in an asylum for her murder. "That's why I'm home early," Lucy replied. "The storm knocked out all the lecky in the salon too, so we couldn't use the dryers." She untied the knot under her chin and removed the drenched headscarf, which had done nothing to protect her burnished copper-coloured hair. "The wind snapped the telegraph wires, so we couldn't take appointments, and Mrs. Buffon let us go early." "Who'd be daft enough to get their hair done in this weather?" Evie shook her head. "Some people who have more money than sense," Lucy said, wringing rainwater from her plaid woolen headscarf into the white Belfast sink. "That's what Mrs. Buffon says, but it doesn't stop her taking their money, although even she was surprised the shop was so empty after dinner." Evie smiled as she poured boiling water into a brown earthenware teapot and covered it with a knitted tea cosy. "You want to be careful calling her Mrs. Buffon. She might hear you and give you the sack." Evie placed the pot of tea onto the tin tray their mother had borrowed from the Tram Tavern years ago and forgot to take back, while Lucy inhaled the heavenly aroma of a meaty casserole. "Something smells good. Are you baking cakes as well?" Lucy asked, almost breathless as she hung her headscarf on the wooden clothes horse in the corner of the kitchen. "I'm baking some scones to keep the casserole company in the oven. They should be done by now." Evie didn't like waste, not even oven space. "We'll have one with a nice cup of tea while they're still warm." "With currants?" Lucy asked expectantly, a look of hope in her eyes. "You can't get currants at this time of year," Evie said, knowing the whole country was still experiencing rationing, 8 years after the war had ended. And for those who can afford dried fruit, hoarding makes it scarce. "You should have asked Leo Darnell." Lucy's Celtic lilt, gained from 7 years' evacuation in Ireland during the war, held a hint of mischief. "He'd know where to lay his hands on some." "I wouldn't ask that man to throw water on me if I was on fire," Evie said, with a determination Lucy had come to expect, knowing her elder sister, who got along with everybody, despised Leo Darnell with a passion. Evie led the way into the front room. "If he was the last person on earth, I wouldn't ask him for a push up the curb." Lucy's eyebrows pleated as she followed Evie, who tried her best to dissolve all thoughts of the spiv from her mind. Evie loathed him for the way he made a show of her that summer in 47, when he burned all the work she had done in night school, the day before her final examination, and then beat her into the gutter while her mother tried to save her. But, despite his bullying, her mother wasn't persuaded to throw him out. "Here, come and sit down by the fire. You look perished." Evie's tone was deliberately bright as she put the tea tray on the table near the window. Lucy didn't need asking twice and stretched her hands out to the blazing fire while Evie poured the tea. And, turning, Lucy lifted her skirt to warm her legs before sitting down. "Oh, that's lovely." She closed her eyes and sighed rapturously when the heat began to seep into her frozen limbs. "It was good of Madame Barbary to let you go early," Evie said to her sister. "Goodness had nothing to do with it," Lucy scoffed. "She closed early because the hairdryers don't work without electricity and all the lights went off. Even the street lights are out. It's like the blackout all over again." Not that she had seen the blackouts, thought Lucy. She was evacuated to Ireland with her brother Jack when they were young. She sighed, wondering what Jack would be up to now. Drafted into national service in 1951, he wasn't best pleased that national service had been extended from 18 months to 2 years when the Korean War broke out in 1950. His first posting. "There's been storm damage from one end of the country to the other," said Evie, breaking into her thoughts. "The news was on the wireless. I'm glad we've got gas mantles and a gas cooker. At least we've got light, even if it is a bit dimmer than usual, and the wireless has a battery." "The weather's getting worse by the hour," Lucy remarked. "I feel sorry for anybody out in that. I was nearly blown into the canal a few times. Me and Rachel had to hold on to each other in case we fell over, but we did have a laugh." "Let's have a scone to tide us over till the casserole is ready. I was first in the queue for the butcher's this morning and managed to get some scrag ends of mutton for the casserole. It's been in the oven all afternoon." Evie handed Lucy a scone slathered in golden butter. Not the sump oil concoction they usually had to eat, pleased to see her sister's eyes widen. "Where did you come off with the butter?" Lucy asked, enjoying the delicious, if rare, treat. "Ada Harris brought it up this morning," Evie answered, acknowledging the look of surprise on her sister's face. Ada, who cleaned the Tram Tavern, was not a regular visitor to the house and never had been, even though she enjoyed the salacious gossip their mother's antics had caused in the past. Ada would prefer not to be caught knocking at their door. "I suppose she had a visit from Leo Darnell," Lucy said, "which would explain where she got the butter from. But why did she share it with us? She never has before." "The wedding," Evie answered crisply, and the two girls nodded in unison. "I know for a fact Danny has not invited her yet." Both girls knew that Ada's husband, Bert, had been blackmailing Henry, who had owned the cartage business, which he sold to Danny. She called on the pretext of having too much butter in her larder, wanting all the details of the wedding, wanting to know if Meggie had bought her hat yet, and did I know what colour it was, and a June wedding was the best time of the year, and so romantic, and on and on. And it wouldn't be as big as their Grace's wedding, but it would be lovely all the same. You know how she likes to brag. "I do indeed," Lucy answered, knowing Ada was as quick as lightning when there was a bit of gossip on the go, and even quicker when she wanted to know what was going on in the area. One thing she can't abide is not being in the know. She'll be worried Mim knows more about the wedding than she does. "I think she was angling for an invitation, to be honest," Evie said. Ada had raised Evie's fiancé from a young baby, but the manner in which Danny had discovered the truth about his family had rankled. He was furious he had not been told that Meggie Skinner was his birth mother, who had hit on hard times and had to give him up to Ada to take care of, so she could work and earn enough to pay for her son's upbringing. Although, in the time she and Danny had been courting, Evie knew he had mellowed towards Ada, realising it was not her fault the way the truth had come out. You know what Danny's like. He doesn't hold a grudge. Well, not often. Evie gave a small laugh. But he's working so hard trying to keep the business afloat. He probably hasn't given a thought to the wedding guest list. Maybe Ada was trying to get an invite from you, Lucy said, enjoying her scone. I won't step on Danny's toes and invite Ada. The choice must be his. But I think she does deserve to be at the wedding. I'll have a word. He will do what he thinks is right. He usually does. Lucy, finishing the last of her scone, turned to the window when another downpour of hailstones thundered against the window pane. I certainly wouldn't want to be outside on a night like this, Evie said, getting up from the table and pulling the curtains across the sash window. Even though it was still only mid-afternoon, the hostile sky made it impossible to see outside, and she wanted to block out the howling wind rattling the wooden casement. Giving an appreciative sniff, she added, "A hearty casserole is just the thing when Mother Nature vents her rage." Why did this storm have to wait until Saturday? Lucy sounded peeved. Even the dance in St. Paddy's Church Hall would be called off. She loved her weekly outing to the Churchill dance with Rachel. Evie knew Rachel spent more time here than she did in her own house, and she noticed that now the hot tea had thawed her, Lucy had brightened. I tell you what, I'll give you a shampoo and set if you like. Shall we leave it until tomorrow? Evie said. Then it will have all day to dry. They, like most in Reckoners Row, except Ada Harris and the Blackthorns, did not have electricity installed, and it would take ages for her hair to dry. And although she wanted to help Lucy by giving her the chance to practice her skills, she didn't fancy going to bed with wet hair on a night like this. Lucy nodded. She had a natural talent when it came to hairdressing and practiced every chance she got. Evie took a sip of hot tea, and her thoughts turned to Danny, who was out there in the storm. She prayed that the old wagon didn't give up the ghost in the middle of nowhere. Sure, the battered old wagon would not last much longer. Danny really did have a lot to contend with right now, as the horses weren't as young as they used to be either. Maybe she wouldn't bother him with thoughts of Ada wanting a wedding invitation. I hope Danny is safe and the old wagon doesn't let him down, she said, voicing her thoughts. Even with a lot of luck and hard work, I doubt the business could afford a second-hand wagon, never mind a new one. Are things really that bad? Lucy inquired, and Evie nodded. It doesn't seem fair, said Lucy. Danny working all the hours in the day, and Grace Harris married to a millionaire. Evie knew what her sister was alluding to. Grace and Danny had been raised as brother and sister, although they were no relation. But even so, Danny would never go cap in hand to Grace's husband, though he liked the chap, nor would he allow anybody else to know the business was in trouble. Danny peered out of the cracked windscreen as the wipers fought to keep pace with the lashing rain, but it was impossible, and he could see nothing as the wagon rattled and spluttered, struggling to clamber over the dirt road ridges where no proper road had been laid. As he edged towards the old swing bridge that allowed barges to continue along the river, he could see the water had risen and was bursting its banks, and Danny's hopes of getting home sometime tonight seemed dashed when he saw the road ahead was flooded. He would have to back up and take the long way round. Thankful he knew his way round this part of the countryside. The back lanes would make his journey longer, but it was better than the alternative, which was to stay put and sleep in the wagon overnight. Stretching his aching back, he had been driving all day and the relentless weather made him feel miserable. Not a feeling he was accustomed to usually. He wanted to get home. devour one of Maggie's stews and crumbles, have a bath, and get ready to go and see Evie, where he might get another delicious meal. His thoughts strayed, and immediately his spirits rose, reliving the touch of her velvet skin on his, the feel of her hair running through his fingers, and he was counting down the days when she would be his wife.